Shane takes home back-to-back Stanley Cups, and this actually is a huge deal. Not only has he brought this team back from sort of the brink of oblivion with the fact that they hadn't been able to win a Stanley Cup in 16 years and were barely ever making it into the playoffs in the first place, but we hear the announcers say, is it too early to call it a dynasty? Not since Chicago in the late 90s have we seen a team do back-to-back cups. Now, in the real world, the Chicago Blackhawks have never won back-to-back Stanley Cups. However, again, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of changed and moved around just to make sure that they're not too close to the NHL, since they weren't allowed to actually use NHL teams and branding in this show. But for a little bit of context in terms of like how many teams have ever won back-to-back Stanley Cups, last year the Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup, which made it their first time going back-to-back. Before that, we had the Tampa Bay Lightning go back-to-back, and the last team to go back-to-back Stanley Cups in the 2000s were the Pittsburgh Penguins. But in the late 90s, there was a team that went back-to-back, and that was the Detroit Red Wings. They also have a lot of fun lore on that team, including throwing octopuses on ice during the Stanley Cup Finals. But it's kind of fun to look back at how many teams have actually managed to go back-to-back and realize that it's a pretty stressful feat. And not only that, but when we're talking about NHL parallels, there has not been a Canadian team in the NHL that has won the Stanley Cup since 1993. And if you were wondering which Canadian team most recently brought home the Stanley Cup in 1993, you would be correct in guessing that it was the Montreal Canadiens. So there's this fun thing of sort of referencing how big of a deal it would be for a team to go back-to-back. But if this really was in the NHL and it was happening in 2014 and 2015, this would have been the first team to go back-to-back since the late 90s. And in the real world parallel, the Pittsburgh Penguins and Sidney Crosby took home their back-to-back championship run, becoming the first team to do it since Detroit in the late 90s. So there are little moments like this, really little moments throughout the series where you can feel so much hockey knowledge, like puck knowledge in an extreme way, that I will tell you it wouldn't be possible to create a character like Shane Hollander if it weren't for Rachel Reed understanding so much about hockey, and Jacob Tierney, of course, respecting that and also knowing so much about hockey himself. There is so much little hockey history, little NHL history throughout this show that it's almost mind-blowing, and you miss so much of it even just on your first run. The idea that Shane takes home back-to-back cups for the first time in a long time, in pretty much the same timeline that Sidney Crosby was doing the same thing with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I just have to tell you, my dream is to sit down with Rachel Reed and just talk about hockey for 100 hours. The woman is an encyclopedia and did such a good job of building a world that is adjacent to the NHL without being exactly the same.